Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Abundant Wellness Podcast. Today, we have Lisa Smith here. She is the founder and owner of ADHD on Schedule. She has been an occupational therapist in school settings for over 30 years. I think that's what you said. She is ADHD certified and a certified brain health practitioner. But what has, I think, informed your treatment, your approach, probably even more than all of your trainings is your parenting a child with ADHD and a child with sensory processing disorder. So thank you so much for being here today with us. I am so excited to have this conversation with you. Is there anything that I missed in introducing you that you want to share today?
I think you encapsulated it pretty well, but I can just go a little bit deeper into the parent part because I think for me, that's where things really pivoted to where I am today. For the first half probably of my career as an occupational therapist in the school, I was treating kids with ADHD based on what I learned in school, which honestly is not very much because even teachers, special education teachers, school staff, we don't really receive a lot of training in ADHD. So I was using what I had learned. And when my daughter turned 13, she was diagnosed with ADHD. And so that completely pivoted. Okay, I need to learn everything about this because when we were given the diagnosis, I was like, okay, so what's next? And I was basically, handed a pamphlet for Ritalin, and that was all I got. And sadly, over a decade later, that's still what a lot of parents are getting. They're not getting a lot of
Yep.
guidance or support. So I really, what most parents do, you take matters into your own hands. And I, was able to get an ADHD certification because, I am an OT and I do have the ability to work with kids because you do have to have a certain number of hours in working with kids with ADHD to get
Right.
certified. And just a whole new world opened up to me of things that I just had no idea of. And so I was able to use them with my daughter. And I thought, you know what, this needs to go much beyond, what I'm doing. And I started using those strategies with the kids I work with as well. And then in recent years, I started ADHD on Schedule so that I could share this information with families as well.
I love that. And gosh, isn't it true that I can speak to this for myself as my formal training is as a pediatric nurse in hospital conventional medicine. But I think what has informed more of my practice now is raising a child with differences and different needs. It's kind of forced me to look at the world a little bit differently, look at how to treat her, how to help her differently. And I think that where we could kind of go. There's so many different places we could go with this. But I think let's talk about that piece of it because I think when my daughter was first diagnosed with ADHD, inattentive type, we had, the neuropsych evaluation. It's like a 16 to 20 hour evaluation that they do. There's probably different ways to get a diagnosis now. There's the CPT test, there's a couple other ways that we can get our child diagnosed, but I was under the impression like, oh, I can just send her to OT and like problem solved. But what I didn't realize, and this is where you come in and where I'm so glad that I found you, was how much of my parenting would have to change in order to help her brain gain the executive function that she was struggling with, because it is in part there are executive function challenges within that, right? And so I thought, oh, okay, I can send her to OT, which I think is where a lot of parents, their thought process is like, oh, I can send her somewhere, or I can send her to, get treatment or put them on medication or whatever. And not realizing that, like, no, we actually have to help kind of build a scaffolding to help them gain these executive function skills. And so you're like, the way that I think I found you on TikTok actually is where I found
Mhm.
you.
Yep.
And you have a great presence there, which I love. And how you talked about it was so like warm and engaging and nurturing that I felt like, oh, there's a space for me as the mom to mess up, to figure this out too, and to not have such a chaotic home environment. So, can you share with us just a little bit about how we might need to, as parents, shift our expectations around how to parent these kids with, different challenges, different brain structures, different development? I know that's like a lot, but maybe we can start there.
Sure. Just to back up just a smidge, I think the one thing that would be very helpful for parents to understand first is the fact that the number one recommended treatment for kids with ADHD, ages 5 to 12, is medication paired with parent training. And if you have a
Mm,
child under 5, it's just parent training. So I don't think, I would guess that many of your listeners probably are surprised by that, because really 90% of
I didn't
parents
know that.
were
Yeah,
never
I didn't
told
know
that
that
parent
before.
training was a piece of this puzzle at all. So I think the first step is just realizing, like you said earlier, that it's not a matter of waiting for your child to grow out of it. It's not a matter of thinking that the school is going to fix it. And I don't say that in a way that a parent is being negligent. It's just we were never told of the role that we play in this. And the reason that
Yeah.
it's so important is because those executive function skills, they are best developed in the moment. We call that the point of performance. It's where the action happens. So although your child can get all of these great services and supports, if they learn in a therapist's office, frustration tolerance, but the parent is never informed of those strategies to incorporate and scaffold and use at home. When the child is in that moment, when they're at home and they can't find, their soccer cleat, and you're screaming at them, well, hurry up, we got to get in the car. They're not going to be able to recall, because of that executive function delay, they're not going to be able to recall those strategies likely and on their own put them into place. So that is why our role is so important, to be that support and to learn all of the strategies that are very ADHD specific, so that when our kids are in those moments, we have some tools in our toolbox to know what to do.
Absolutely. Wow, there's like 5 questions I have within that, but you nailed it, which is perfect. But let's talk a little bit about what is scaffolding, because I mentioned that you mentioned that I had to learn what that was, because I was the parent that was, before, and I would say even probably a little bit after we got the diagnosis, where I'm trying to learn her brain and learn where the deficits are and learn why certain things are hard for her, like why I can tell her younger sister, who's like 4.5, will leave in 5 minutes, and she has an internal clock. Whereas if I tell my oldest child we're leaving in 5 minutes, it's the now, not now, right? Like it's not now. So what that could be an eternity from now, right? So I had to learn, first of all, what those deficits were. And number two, I had to learn about scaffolding. So, can you briefly describe what is scaffolding and why do we have to learn how to do that for our children with ADHD?
Sure. So, in the easiest terminology, scaffolding is basically teaching and support. But I'm a very visual person. So, I like to kind of visualize like the scaffolding on a building. If you think of like a skyscraper, you will see that, that support starts off at the very bottom. And as you build and as you build, and as things get, the foundation is in place, that scaffolding continues to increase. So basically, it's meeting your child where they are now with the level of support and teaching that they need at that level. And then you move on to the next level of support once that one has kind of been established.
Yeah, that's really, really good. And I will say, I know that we didn't talk about resources. You are absolutely a resource, but I would say the book Smart But Scattered
Mhm.
really helped me to understand that concept of scaffolding. It also helped me to understand that I also had some executive function
Yeah.
deficits that were contributing, which you do really, really well in your program, but also just in what you share. You talk about even like how to identify some of those. And I didn't identify them until I saw them in my daughter. And I was like, I also have that. Maybe I
Mhm.
need some internal scaffolding too. So, understanding the scaffolding, understanding that I think there's this internal frustration as the parent because we are seeing behaviors that they're disruptive to our goal for the day. They're disruptive to, and I'm not saying this with any judgment on the child, but it's like it almost disrupts the organization of the family because their brain functions a little bit differently. And so we also have to learn all of the skills that they are learning, if that makes sense, or that we're expecting them to learn, meaning I have to develop frustration tolerance. I have to create different internal and external cues for the whole family then to be able to function properly, if that makes sense. So, what would you say, just like for our listeners, what would you say is maybe the biggest struggle that parents have aside from whether or not we do medication or whether or not we do OT or like taking that out of the equation? When we're looking at the family home environment and managing these kids and helping them to grow and develop, what would you say is probably the biggest challenge or frustration?
I think one of the biggest challenges and frustrations is tied to what you just said, and that is it has to start with us as the parents first. I think we are looking for, how do I fix this behavior in my child? How do I, fix this? And what we really need to do is we need to look at ourselves first, because we can't expect our child to do anything that we are not doing, that we're not modeling. So many times, when I say to parents, the first thing you need to do is you need to be regulated. You need to be calm. You need to be in control, because you cannot expect that from your child if you are yelling, screaming, your hands are flailing, you're stomping your feet, you're tossing things. And now I want to acknowledge that I think all of us are in that position as parents. We feel that way. We're not calm, right? You feel like maybe you want to throw something. You
Yeah.
feel, like you
Yeah.
can't contain yourself, right? That is a
Right.
normal response. But we have the ability, and we need to make sure that we are doing this as the parent, getting ourselves regulated so that we can use all those tools that we have in our toolbox and model for our child what that looks like. So one of the strategies that I teach is called assumed calm. And that
Mhm.
means that when you are feeling anything but calm, you assume the position of calm, right?
Yes.
You're still feeling it, but you have strategies and tools in your own toolbox that you have learned, so that when you are in that state, you can get to that baseline of coming across as, if not, we're not looking for like, Pollyanna calm, but like, can you at least be neutral so that you can
Yes.
parent for your child? Because when you are dysregulated, when your child is dysregulated, that front part of the brain where all of the thinking goes, it just goes offline. So you
Mhm.
can't do good parenting, and we can't expect our child to change their behavior when either of us is in that state. So I think that is probably the best place to start.
Absolutely. And I will say, I don't actually know where I learned this from. I think it was before I jumped into your coaching program, which is extremely affordable. If you're listening to this, she's got some free resources, but she also has some paid resources. I cannot recommend them enough. If only for the fact that it helped me to feel more sane in the journey. If that was all that I got out of it, it was totally worth it. But I remember just something along those lines of having to stay calm feels really, really exhausting as a parent sometimes because it feels like I'm having to be my brain and my nervous system and their brain and their nervous system. And that feels like a lot of work. But I remember I came up with this like trick for myself one day that was I am going to be the best actor of like staying calm and staying nice that I possibly can. I am taking off the mom hat and I am putting on the actress hat right now. Because if I stay in the mom mode, I am emotionally attached and emotionally charged by everything that she does. And it's just fueling this fire in me, right? Of like, why is this so hard? And why aren't we seeing progress? And all of those things that as moms we feel. But if we can stay in that place, like you said, of whatever trick you have to tell yourself to stay calm, and for me, that was at times I'm going to be the best actress right now of staying calm. So I'm going to get into I'm going to get into the part and get into the character of what it means to stay calm and healthy and regulated in this moment and kind of detach myself from the emotion that I feel about the fact that my child has object permanence issues, which means then everything has to be on display. And that means that everything is a hot mess in this room. Like I can't brainstorm, I can't troubleshoot because again, your frontal lobe goes offline, right? So I found that when I was able to use the tools that you provided, however I needed to do that, then I could troubleshoot. Okay, she has object permanence issues. She needs to be able to see things in order to remember that they're there. Otherwise, she's not going to remember that they're there. That's the working memory problem, right?
Mhm.
So then what I did is I went out and I bought a whole bunch of clear bins and I was like, you can put whatever you want in here, but they have to be in the bins. And they had like at the end of the day, because I can't handle this level of mess all the time.
Mhm.
So we're gonna compromise here. You're gonna put all the crap in, I didn't call it crap because that would have been rude, all of your stuff in the clear bins, and you're gonna put it in the drawers so that it's away, but you can see it. You don't have to label it. You don't have to, it doesn't have to be color coded. Like I am not that kind of type A personality. But little things like that that helped me to, because I stayed calm, now I can figure out a solution to the problem that meets both of our needs instead of me just like, why don't you put all this stuff away? And why do you have so much crap? And I can't handle the mess, right? That's me being dysregulated. And so, and yet within that, I actually recognized I also probably have a little bit of that, the object permanence issue where if I don't keep things out, I forget where they go sometimes. So I'm also learning how to build up some of those executive function traits. So do you find that that's true for a lot of families with ADHD? I know that there is a genetic component to it that at least our neuropsych person that did the testing said, yep, we do see a genetic component to it. But do you see that where there's like a familial tendency if a child has ADHD with the executive function, uh, however that, or executive dysfunction, however that shows up, that you also can see some of those maybe deficits in the parent as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, I mean, ADHD is a highly genetic condition. So the likelihood that, a parent has it if a child has it is high. But even if that's not the case, everybody has executive function skills, right? We need them 24/7. I mean, maybe not when we're sleeping, um, but ADHD is a condition of executive function delay. So it's a spectrum disorder, which means that there's likely more severity of those skills. But we have them just as our kids have them. And so that's why I think it's important to not only understand what strengths and weaknesses your child's executive function skills are, but to also know yours as well, because there could be, like you said, the tendency where you have something that's the same, but there also could be the opposite, where you could be someone, like you said, that maybe, you are super into organization and everything has to be just so and labeled and very clean and put together. And you might have a child who is very weak in that. So now you have this mismatch. Excuse me. And now you have to navigate, how do I parent when I know that this is something that is really, high on my scale, but my kid is really struggling with. So that becomes a piece of the puzzle as well.
Yes, and I think you have a guide, like an assessment guide on that, right? Okay, I'm like I do
I
remember
do,
filling
yeah.
that
It's
out.
it's the one of the bonuses when you
Okay,
join the Simply ADHD membership. There is a executive function skill rating scale, and it's
yes,
both for the parent and the child. And
yes.
even sometimes it's helpful to know, your partner, what are
Mhm.
theirs, because that can, parenting, if there's a mismatch in the two parents on how they approach things, that can add some stress to the whole situation and even other siblings. So yeah, definitely helpful to know all of that.
Absolutely. And I will just again vouch for that because I feel like I had done some of the larger assessments in the Smart but Scattered book, and that was very helpful, but I really loved the way yours was laid out as well. It was very useful. And like you said, it's not like to feel bad about yourself. It's not to feel bad about your child and where their deficits are. It's really to just like, we can't build if we don't know like what's going on in the foundation, right? We can't know where the structure needs to be if we don't build that. So I'm going to go back to the object permanence as just as an example, because it's that I don't see it, so therefore it's not there. That is like at the base, from my understanding of it. And so once I understood that about her brain, it was like, oh, this problem of like feeling like I'm having to constantly remind her to brush her teeth, or this is where the toothpaste is, or this is where your toothbrush goes, or this is where your shoes go. It just like eliminated the problem. I got the clear tubs for her clothes. I wrote like shirts, pants, shorts, socks, underwear. And I'm like, I don't care if they're folded, just this is where they go. As long as you can see them and find them. See, simple solution that got me out of the constant battle that we get in with our children who are struggling. And also, once I came into that framework of recognizing my child is doing the best that she can. She's
Mhm.
not trying to be difficult. This is difficult, and it's also difficult for her just as much as it's difficult for me. And so, how can we create some solutions around that? Even just that simple understanding of like, oh, this is where that deficit is. Now we can fix it. And now she doesn't need to have like as she's getting older, as she's learned some of her tools, as we've introduced different, different modalities for healing, she's not needing as much of my brain in the picture, if that makes sense. Um, how are some of the ways you talked about staying calm and focused, but as a parent, I think I'm going to go back to this, but I think there's a lot of listeners that will resonate with this because I know if it was me, I know it can't just be me. Um, the hardest thing was recognizing that my parenting would have to change. And it didn't mean that I had to become a different person. It just meant that I had to develop different skills. So, what are some common ways that you see that parents need to parent a little bit differently for these kids, whether it's sensory processing or ADHD? We can just stay on the topic of ADHD to keep it simple. Um, and really come out of that. I had to come out of the belief system that her behavior was a discipline problem. Like initially it was like, I just have to discipline more, right? I just have to have more consequences. I just have to blah, blah, blah. I had to really shift my focus to from that as a behavior discipline problem to an executive function problem, which meant that I had to completely change how I was doing things. So when parents are first kind of coming to you, what are some ways that you see as a foundation that we have to begin to parent differently, than maybe with a neurotypical child that doesn't have ADHD?
Yeah, I think the first thing to do, once you've gotten that foundation of you being calm, and once you know how to get your child calm, because that's another component too, want to help them get regulated, though that's the priority. Once that has been established, then we can start delving into, okay, what are these behaviors and where are they coming from? Because you're right, it is, Dr. Russell Barkley, who is like the lead researcher in ADHD, he has said that ADHD is the most difficult neurodevelopmental disorder for parents to deal with because of the fact that pretty much the majority of the ADHD symptoms that we see look like a behavior. So they look like our child is not listening. They look like they're out of control. They look selfish. They look ungrateful. They're rude. They're disrespectful. And we are the parents that can't handle them. We're not strict enough. We're not doing this. I mean, how many times, we heard, oh, just give me him for a week and, I'd turn him around, so
Best
we're feeling,
wishes. Best
yeah,
wishes. Yeah, because I
yeah, yeah,
guarantee
like,
you, I
good
have tried
luck.
everything that you're going to say. If you say that to me, I guarantee you, I've read every book. I've done everything that you're about to say. Anyways, yes,
Exactly.
continue.
Totally. So yeah, so we really need to be empowered with knowing what to do and how to do it. Because we do have a child that has an executive function delay, we need to know, okay, when my child has this behavior. So let me think of a simple one. So let's just say that, you have asked your child to grab their lunch, grab their backpack, and oh, don't forget your jersey for your game later. And you get in the car and you're almost to school, and your child's like, "Oh, I forgot my jersey," and you're like, "Oh, you know what? This is ridiculous. You're not being respectful of my time. You didn't listen to me when I told you to do that." So now it looks like, in your mind, your child did these, intentional things, or was not very thoughtful of,
Yeah.
of the whole situation, when really what they're lacking are some of those executive function skills. So for example, when you told them to, go get those different things, they might have been able to, in their mind, visualized two out of the three of them. And the other one
Mhm.
just went off,
Somewhere else.
and
Yeah.
yeah, it is lost forever. Your child may have difficulty with a part of working memory, self-talk. So when they get upstairs to where they need the things, they don't have that ability to say, okay, mom said to get this, this, and this. And oh, you know what else? If I need my jersey, I'm probably going to need my water bottle too. I better grab that. That ability to kind of picture things in the future, to use self-talk with themselves, is an executive function skill that many kids with ADHD are lacking. So what we need to do is we need to realize, oh, the reason that my child did this was because they are lacking this skill. Oh, and let me reach into my toolbox. Now I know when my child has difficulty with working memory, here are some strategies that I can use. Here's the scaffolding that I can put into place to make sure that when we get in the car, it's a lot more likely that, when we get to school, my kid is going to have all of the things that they need. And that is a whole different, scenario than the previous one, where everybody's upset, everybody, is mad at the other person. And
Yep.
in this situation, you're setting the whole situation up for success, because really our kids, they don't want to disappoint us. How many times do they hear, you forgot this, you didn't do that, why did you do this, what were you thinking? So we really, not only help their skills, but we really help their self-confidence and their self-esteem as well, because that's something that they're really struggling with too.
Absolutely. Yep. And I think as parents, we never feel good either. At the end of the day, when we're like, man, I really blew it because I lost control of myself because I was frustrated. And granted, there's always a million reasons why that happens, right? There's probably something else going on with your other child, or maybe you woke up late for work. And you know what I mean? Like, there's always a compilation of things, but at the same token, none of us enjoy that feeling of blowing it. And yet the reality is that the self-esteem issues that our kids have with ADHD is exactly what you said, which is where they're hearing it far more frequently than somebody without those deficits. They're hearing the negatives far more frequently than our children who maybe don't have that same struggle. And so I love what you shared about, just changing our perspective on that and really helping them to grow, because that is our role as their parent, is to, we've been given the children that we've been given, however they come, right? We don't get to choose that. We can make our best, most informed decisions about how to navigate them through the challenges that they have. But the reality is that we're going to have to grow into the challenge of parenting them. And this is where I think resources like yours are just extremely beneficial. I know for me, I felt, one, there was community, so I felt less alone and less crazy in the struggles. Every once in a while, a mom would post something like, I just have to get this out here that I totally blew it today, and I'm gonna try, I'm gonna work on my skills, and we are working on our executive function skills too. So I
Absolutely.
loved that because it helped me to feel Like I was hearing less of the, like you said, just give me your child for a week and I'll fix it, or just, you just need to discipline. You just need to have more consequences. Consequences work great when the child has a great working memory and can remember the consequences.
Mhm.
They don't work so great if those deficits are there. It's like I explained to a friend, I think one time, that was like, privately, I would call it Dory brain, like Dory from Finding Nemo, because like, and I would never ever say this to her face, but like that's how I think about it in my head. Oh, she's having a Dory brain moment. It helped me to keep things lighthearted. It helped me to not be frustrated. It helped me to remember what the main problem was, which was her working memory is not working right now.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
we've got to develop some other skills there. So I loved the community aspect um, of the group. I loved your trainings were phenomenal, really excellently priced. I know you didn't ask me to shout you out this much, but I am, because you're
Well,
you're
thank you.
you're amazing. And honestly, it's not a resource I could provide. As a functional health practitioner, as a nurse, I can come in with the more like the nutritional aspect and how do we support healthy brains and neurotransmitter function and some of the other deficits that we tend to see, but I'm not the parent coach, and I can only share from my personal experience, and your wealth of wisdom is just it is totally worth just following you alone. I learned so much from that. So what might you say to a mom, a parent who's listening, that's in the place of like really wherever their child at on the spectrum of diagnosis? Either they just got diagnosed or they're at that place where they're like, I don't know what else to do. We've tried medication, we have some resources in place, whatever those are, whatever those therapies and supports are, and yet we're still having all of these issues at home. What might you encourage them to do?
So it definitely is, I think, a holistic approach, right? With all the things that you said, um, we need to look at the basics, and those things can't be overlooked. Sleep, diet, getting outdoors. All of those things can be just as important as medication. The thing with medication is that it can be super helpful for some kids. It's a very personal family decision, but whether you choose that or not, there's the saying, pills don't teach skills.
Yeah,
So even if you do decide to medicate, that is not going to fix all the problems. It may allow your child to get to a point where they can attend and where their impulses are controlled enough that they can learn these skills, but now the skills have to be learned. So it is
right.
a multifaceted approach for sure. So, a lot of times parents are already saying, listen, I'm doing the basics, I've read, I think I'm doing most of the right things, but usually the missing piece is the parent training. It's the knowing what to do and knowing how to do it. So I would definitely encourage any parent that if that's where you feel like you are stuck, is to get some kind of parent training. I mean, you can start off with, just reading books. There are tons of great books out there on ADHD. The one thing I do have to say is that in recent years, the awareness of ADHD has kind of exploded. It's
Yes,
kind of everywhere on social media now, which is a good thing and not a good thing, because you do have to keep in mind that you're getting your information from someone that is a licensed professional that has experience, treating
yes,
kids with ADHD. But I would think that there's very few parents out there that are like, I can't find any information about ADHD anywhere. It's
yeah,
more about finding that parent training that is related to your child's symptoms, behaviors, and presentation, so that you know what to do, that you feel confident, you feel competent, you feel empowered. Oh, it's certainly not going to be perfect. Like I always look at it as like a toolbox where it's like, okay, my
mhm,
child is doing this. But when you have no tools in your toolbox, you are just spinning your wheels. When you have
right,
some tools in your toolbox, you at least have things to try and feel like, you're being very purposeful. Like, I learned this, I'm going to try this. Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. If it doesn't, you go on to a different tool and you try.
right.
It's a process for sure.
Absolutely. No, I think that's perfect. And I think just your wealth of knowledge is so important. And like you said, there's a ton of information out there, but making sure that you're going from the information absorption, you're just absorbing everything to then taking something and taking action. Like, especially if you're in that place where you're just frustrated, overwhelmed. I don't like the dynamics in our home. I don't like how much I'm yelling at my child. I know they can't fix it. I don't know what to do to make this better. That's when we want to start taking some action for ourselves and really bring some change into our home. So thank you, Lisa, for all that you shared. Do you have any last parting words of wisdom or encouragement you'd like to share today?
I think the last thing I would like to just remind parents is to not take things personal that your kids do, because, like I said, many of their behaviors are, or their symptoms look like behaviors that are not so great behaviors. We can sometimes take it personal. And one strategy that I like to share with parents is when your kid is saying something to you that's rude or disrespectful or hurtful, or they're doing something that, is just, beyond frustrating, is to just picture like a little speech bubble, above their head. And if you know what skills they're lacking, you can kind of put the skill in the speech bubble. Like for you with your daughter, knowing that if it's out of sight, it's out of mind. You can picture that. And then it kind of gives you a little bit more compassion. It gives you that pause to maybe parent a different way. And if you're not sure what skills your child is lacking, then maybe the speech bubble just says, my child is doing the best they can with what they have. And again,
Yes.
just giving you some of that compassion to know that it's not intentional, it's not personal, it's just the sign of a differently wired brain.
Yeah. Wow. That's really good. I'm going to use that speech bubble trick. That's a really good one. Because it does, it helps you to kind of separate yourself like from the emotionally charged feeling, right? Because we're connected, we're in relationship, very close relationship with our children, hopefully. And so it's, it's not easy to not take it personally, especially when, some of their comments do come across as rude or just lacking a certain filter, right? Or that impulse control is not there. So it's like, bloop, and then they might realize later, I'm sorry, I didn't really mean that. I should have listened to you. So again, it really does come back to us as the parent, knowing that we don't have to do it perfectly, but that we can learn skills that help the home environment to feel better. So thank you so much, Lisa, for your time today. I am hopeful that if you're listening to this and this resonates with you, please, at a very minimum, go give her a follow. I think you're on Instagram and TikTok. Is that right? Or mainly
Just I do have Instagram, but I don't use it. But TikTok
okay.
is basically where you can find me, or my website.
Okay, perfect. And I will make sure to link the resources that you sent over as well in the show notes for the listeners. But thank you so much for being here today, Lisa.
Thank you. I really enjoyed it.